Hi, my friends, and welcome to this webinar for the STEM storyline titled Inspired by Nature, which is a NGSS aligned curriculum unit for first grade. Now, this unit used to previously be simply the FOSS New Plants Kit, but we're adding this storyline to support teachers in implementing NGSS aligned activities along with using the hands-on materials that previously came with the FOSS kit. And I'll talk more about that in a bit. But in the meantime, welcome. So my name is Pranjali Upadhyay. I'm the Integrated Curriculum Coordinator here at ESD 112, and I have co-written this curriculum unit with a couple of teachers from Longview School District. So excited to have you here today as we walk through this unit. So welcome again. The intentions for this webinar are for you to feel really ready and excited to teach the STEM storyline and to implement it in your classroom. So here is the way that we will organize this webinar. We're going to start with an entry event. So this is literally the beginning of our curriculum unit. We're going to share that with you to get us excited and engaged in the storyline. Then we will take a real quick detour to talk about what the storylines are and how they support us in implementing next generation science standards. And then we're going to continue our walk through of the Inspired by Nature storyline. So we're going to walk through the entire unit so you feel really ready and familiar with different components of it as you are ready to implement it in your classroom. So without further ado, let's go ahead and launch our unit. So lesson 1, unit launch. And in case you are following along in the digital unit, which is also linked in the YouTube video that you're watching, we are currently on page 9 of our curriculum unit. So this unit starts by showing students different interesting structures in nature that have actually inspired certain technologies that we as humans use to make life easier. So these burrs that you see pictures of are an example of that. So instead of having you put on the student hat right now, I would like to invite you to take a look at some of those structures in nature that we have mimicked and kind of borrowed some of these ideas from to create technologies. So students would be thinking about and kind of talking aloud at this point, thinking about these structures. As you can see here, they're pretty good at sticking to things. More sticking of the burrs to adorable dogs. And so we make the connection between these burrs and Velcro. So there's a video in the unit that you could check out that will talk about how humans use nature as inspiration for designing things that help make life easier for us. There's more talk about this. Students probably have some experience with Velcro, so this should not be, or hopefully will not be something brand new to them. And so we continue on looking at different really cool animal and plant structures and how they can really inspire us as we think about designing solutions to some of the problems that we have in our lives. You can feel free to watch this video. So if you're in the curriculum unit right now, if you take a look on page 9, for instance, it'll say intro slides. You can actually click that and it'll take you to a slideshow. So the slideshows I'm using, they're all accessible to you and they're a part of the teacher supporting materials in the unit. So we have a pretty robust set of slides presentations ready for you so that you're not having to rustle this stuff together in the very limited time that you do have. So please feel free to kind of check that along and take a look at how you might want to use it. Maybe there's a better video that you have or something that interests you or the students that you teach that you can pull in. So my advice would be to make a copy of the slideshows in your own Google Drive, and that way you can make all the changes you need and keep that as kind of like a living document that is incorporating your expertise that you have with the topic. So we have some more images that I will probably quickly move us along through that would be really interesting for your students to think about or think out loud of what they see and how some of these natural structures of animals and plants are similar to some of the things that we created as humans. So that's this whole idea of biomimicry, but we haven't introduced that word biomimicry yet. When we're thinking about science vocabulary, sometimes it's good to have some of those concrete ideas already there before we introduce vocabulary. So that way students have an understanding that they're creating on their own, that you're then going to help them think more deeply about by introducing that vocab term. So we haven't introduced biomimicry yet, but we're getting there. So suction cups might be something they're familiar with. And now we bring up the story of the kingfisher, which is a bird that has a really precise and interesting way of hunting for fish. And we have a video here of a kingfisher diving, and you can feel free to watch it. And as it's going to enter the water, you see barely any splash. Such a precision and such is the structure of its beak that it can pretty much get into the water without even disturbing it to grab a fish. So go ahead and watch that video if you'd like. And then there's this story that is introduced in this first lesson about the shape of the kingfisher's beard and how it has inspired this structure of this Japanese bullet train, which used to actually make a whole lot of noise as it was moving through tunnels. It was pretty much a sonic boom every time it was moving through the tunnel. And it was creating a huge disturbance for the local population, the residential neighborhood that lived nearby. So scientists used, or engineers used, this structure of the kingfisher to inspire a new design, which actually is much more quiet and makes the train much more efficient, actually, as far as how quickly it's able to move and how efficiently it's able to move. So again, we see an example of. So here is where we introduce the driving question of the unit, which is how can we use our understanding of nature to help our family solve a problem? And this is the driving question of our entire unit. We're looking at nature. We're really trying to understand how structures in nature function the way they do because of the way they're shaped, because of the way they're made, and how can we use some of this as inspiration to help us solve a problem? So we're looking at engineering, and we're looking at this idea of biomimicry. So here is a brainstorm possibility, and we've also attached on page 10, you're going to have a handout that says everyday problems at home. And there's a chance for students to take home this thinking template and to think with their families, what are some problems that we have at home that we might need help solving? And so kids work with their families to brainstorm some problems. And there's a lot of like hilarious stuff that that I've seen being collected. So we want to maybe stick to chores and other household home related problems instead of more of the social related problems like little brothers being mean or big brothers being mean type problems. But that would be an interesting handout that you can send home. And then there's this really nice book called Ada to a Scientist that talks about solving problems and curiosity and what it means to be a scientist. Kind of like a non-traditional type look at what it means to be a scientist and how messy actually the process of doing science actually is. So we've suggested an idea for an anchor chart that you might be able to use for this storyline unit. So I'm currently on page 13 of our curriculum. And so we're reintroducing the driving question, which is how can we use our understanding of nature to help our family solve a problem? And so we need a piece of chart paper, some markers, and we ask students to think about the structures they've seen so far that have helped humans solve a problem. And we're simply writing students' ideas on the anchor chart, and I'm going to show you what the anchor chart looks like, or a possible version of the anchor chart looks like on the next slide. So here we have 3 columns. We have animals, humans in the middle, and then plants on the other side. And we're going to be writing animal structures that help animals survive. And then on the very right side, plant structures and the ways that they help plants survive and reproduce. And then in the center, how have people been inspired by some of these structures? So we can have kind of like a running list going on either side, and then inspiration or biomimicry kind of running in the middle for us to kind of keep track of. So it would be interesting to kind of plot this out throughout the unit, because pretty much that's what we're studying throughout the unit, is how we are inspired by nature and how nature can help us think about our problems in some different and interesting ways. So we just finished lesson 1 of our storyline, and now we're going to take a quick detour and talk a little bit about NGSS and our STEM storylines. So here we have an image of the traditional scientific method as often taught in school. You can pause and maybe think about what you notice about this here. And then we have this slightly different, not slightly different, very different graphic showing how science is actually often done in the real world. And as you can see, it's much less linear, and there's much more fluidity or movement from different phases of this process. Lots more back and forth and like freedom, and it's not so linear, right? It's not so step by step as the traditional scientific method is presented. So in our STEM storylines, we're hoping to create more of an organic process where there's a lot of inquiry, there's a lot of exploration, there's a lot of students making sense of ideas together in their community, lots of testing ideas, and then answering questions. And we're really hoping that curiosity drives the process, and there is a lot of flexibility for students to really think and take ownership of their learning, and also to make sense of things in a way that makes sense to them. And we're going to really quickly look at next generation science standards and the 3 dimensions of NGSS. So in our NGSS standards, we have the science and engineering practices, which are considered the how of the science happening, how it's happening. Then in the center, in the green, you have the disciplinary core ideas, or the what. This is what are the students actually learning. So this resembles more of those traditional science standards that we had before NGSS. And then finally, the why, or the cross-cutting concepts, are how does this, what we're learning, tie in with all of these bigger themes in science? So when we compare 3D learning or NGSS aligned learning to cooking, that analogy really makes sense to me. When we're looking at science and engineering practices, those are the tools for us to come to an understanding of science. So we can't cook really without the tools, right? The disciplinary core ideas, those are going to be the ingredients that are the basis of the meal. That's the stuff we're trying to learn and understand, right? You can't cook a meal without the ingredients. And then finally, the herbs, spices, seasonings, salt, those are the cross-cutting concepts. They help us to tie everything together and understand how it makes a bigger picture. You can't have a meal if you're not going to be using any seasonings on it, or that would be not as an exciting of a meal as if there are the right spices, kind of tying things together to make it a functional and tasty meal. So this is our analogy of three-dimensional learning, which is what NGSS is really going for. So with that reflection on NGSS and 3D learning, I would like to point out that this webinar would feel very different from a FOSS kit training, which focused mostly on like the technical aspects of doing a lab. So we're focusing more on engaging students in deeper 3D learning. So what are we doing? What types of science and engineering practices are we practicing? What are the concepts we're learning? How are we digging deeper into those concepts? And then how are we tying those together with bigger themes in science? So if this does feel different than a traditional science training or STEM kit training, I apologize, but I hope that you're still going to be excited about it, because there's so much learning that happens in those conversations that happen in between those hands-on moments, right? Okay. So here are standards for this unit. You can actually pause and take a look at them. I'm not going to unpack them so much in this webinar, but if you take a look at them, you'll see where the connections are with the storyline and the standards. And those are also outlined in the storyline. After each lesson, we have, for example, page 14, we have how lesson 1 supports next generation science standards. So if you're curious about kind of like the breakdown of how each standard is being implemented in each lesson, please take a look at that portion. I'm not going to spend your time here on that. So we're off to lesson 2, which is titled What Makes a Living Thing? And in this lesson, students delve into the basics of life science by investigating the characteristics of living things. So they're going to begin studying the structures that living things have to help survival. And then at the end of the lesson, they engineer a coat to help keep a pom-pom safe. So there's a little mini engineering design activity embedded within this lesson. And we're also, again, as outlined in our driving question, we're constantly making connections with the animal and plant world and how humans get inspiration from those worlds in order to help our own survival. So we start by looking at a seed, or looking at lima beans. So lima beans are coming in the STEM kit that you are receiving. And so pretty much students are going to dissect the soaked lima bean and split it open and kind of see what a seed coat is. So that's the purpose of session 1. And I'm currently on page 16 in case you're interested in looking at the unit. And then we also start the process. If you look at the bottom of page 16, in the unit, you'll have some some planning notes there, where if you would like students later on to be able to compare a baby seedling to a grown-up seedling, you have to plant the seedlings in advance a little bit, so that way when we're comparing babies to older seedlings, we'll have already growing plants that we'll be able to compare to, instead of our students just being able to see the baby ones as they grow. So that's a little note for you at the bottom of page 16. And then there's some handouts within the storyline to help you have these handouts for your students to think and write and draw. So there's a bean seed dissection handout. Then there's a sentence frame where students get to think about whether a seed is alive or not. And this is going to be an interesting thing for them to think about. I'm curious to see what they would say and how different students might think about this. And so now we're on session 3, which is looking at coats in the seeds and why do we use coats. So we now take a look at different seeds. So black beans and pumpkin seeds are included in the kits. You can also look at different seeds that might be available in, I don't know, school lunch, or lunch that kids are bringing to school? And what's the difference between different seeds and different seed coats, and how are they similar and how are they different? So this is just, again, connecting this idea of structures in nature, specifically with plants, with the real world, with things that students are experiencing. And that's important for us to make those connections with students' lives. And then we expand that and we look at coats on animals. So this is, now we're on session 4. And I'm not going to talk about each image, but as students, well, we looked at seed coats, and now we're going to be looking at coats on animals, and what purpose does that coat have for that animal? How does it protect the animal the way that the seed coat was maybe protecting the inside of the seed, or the baby plant that lives inside the seed? So on page 21, we have a little thinking template called Coats on Animals, where students can pick one of these animals that they looked at or thought about, or maybe even research their own, and write an explanation about how their animal uses its coat. So this is, again, an opportunity for integrating between STEM and English language arts, which is really important that those literacies be tied together. So again, here are some prompts to help students think about the coats, what's different about them, what's the same about them. And then we're looking at cats. So these are the same species, but there's a lot of variation within that species, right? So this is, again, addressing one of our standards, which is looking at how animals can be the same and how they can be different. So here we have a mama cat and a baby cat, but they don't exactly look the same. There's some similarities in features, right? But there's also variation. So we're having students think about parents and babies already, and we're going to continue to look more deeply at that as we move along into the unit. And then now we're at session 5 in lesson 2, where we're connecting to the storyline and looking at the ways that many of our clothing designs really are inspired by animals in nature. There's this little lineup game that they can play where they are just before recess looking at each other's coats, and does anything, especially if it's wintertime, that probably would work the best. Do our coats remind us of any animal coats? So there's a lot of potential to connect this with the real world. So on page 23 of our storyline unit, we have a little integration of this book, Rosie Revere Engineer, which tells the story of Rosie, who really perseveres as an engineer despite a lot of challenges. So we're trying to promote students' natural curiosity, creativity, resilience, growth mindset by looking at this story. So that's on page 23. And then we also have a little handout that says, what does an engineer look like? And students are encouraged to draw themselves in that little handout, because there are a lot of misconceptions on what a scientist looks like or what an engineer looks like, and we really want to encourage students to see themselves as having the potential to be really amazing scientists and engineers. So we're trying to build that positive sense of identity and STEM literacy and STEM identity through our units. So finally, we have the last few sessions of the lesson number 2, where students engage in a engineering activity where they design a coat for a pom-pom. So we provide students with little pom-poms, and then there's a lot of different materials they could use: construction paper, plastic wrap, aluminum foil, wax paper, tissue paper, and they're to think about what material do they want to use to protect the pom-pom from the weather conditions that are outside. So based on, you might want to simulate rain, or you might want to have students design for whatever weather they're dealing with outside. Let's say it's super hot. What would you want to dress your pom-pom as? I've heard that it's fun when you tell the students you're going to simulate rain, and they have to protect their pom-pom from rain. So they have to protect their pom-pom from getting wet. So that is the activity on page 25. And so students design this coat, and then they test the coat, and then they see how it did. And if you have time, you can actually have students modify their design. And really, this is intended for them to have success with a small engineering design challenge. So please do give them the time, if possible, to be successful with this. So we're revisiting the anchor chart, and there's a possibility that students have some things to share about animal coats and plant seed coats that they can then think about, and you can kind of document this on the anchor chart, and it might be something that they find helpful towards the end of the unit when we look at designing a solution to a problem at home. So this is somewhere where we want to really help students see their growth and see what they're learning. So now we are at lesson 3, parents and babies. So in this lesson, we dig deeper into the disciplinary core idea of inheritance of traits. And so by the end of this lesson, students should be able to construct an evidence-based argument that young plants and animals are similar to, but not exactly like their parents. So we started this idea, or talking about this idea, a little bit when we were looking at the cat and the mama cat and the baby cat, or the bunch of cats and their coats and how they were similar and how they were different. So we're going to continue on this idea. So we are now on session 1 of lesson 3, and this is where we're pulling in a FOSS investigation to support students in learning more deeply about this idea. So students will be planting ryegrass, alfalfa seeds, and wheatgrass, and we'll watch it grow. While previously that's pretty much all that students did, was growing these plants, now we're going to be comparing the seedlings to grown-up plants. So in order to do this, we needed to plant the actual seeds a few weeks in advance so that students would have something to compare to, which is why there was that little note previously on, hey teachers, please plant a little quantity before so that students can have something to compare to. And so we're hoping that that's happened, so that you're going to start by showing students a small cup of adult ryegrass, alfalfa, and wheatgrass that you previously grew, and then they will be planting and kind of watching those baby plants or seedlings turn into grown-up plants. So there is a FOSS guide in your binder if you get our STEM ESD STEM kits that you can follow along. But essentially, it is just simply the process of planting using the materials that they have available. So if you are not getting ESD 112 STEM kits, you can still engage in the similar activity simply by planting the seeds in soil and kind of watching them grow. Also, we want there to be some rulers and for students to be able to measure how big the seedlings are. And then we are going to ask students to make predictions about what they think will happen to the seeds. There are some data tables included in the storyline on pages 30 through 33, where students are making observations each day of what their grass seedlings look like. You don't have to print all 8 days. You can print just a couple pages and have them look. Also, it might be better to have a few days in between because there isn't sometimes as much change from day to day, but if you check every 2 days, there might be more change in case you're short on time. And then we also have hand lenses in there for students to be able to see and to look more closely at some of those details. So here's an example of how the wheatgrass will grow. And then there is this straw setup activity that you can use if you would like. And that's simply if you wanted to isolate one wheat seed and kind of just see how one wheat seed grows, you'd be able to do that. So that's also session 1 and lesson 3 in case you were interested. It's pretty simple. You take a straw, you twist up a piece of paper towel and stick it in the bottom. Put it in water so that the seed will be getting water and then the seed will grow. That's there for you in case that's helpful. And then here's a cool time-lapse video. I love time-lapse videos. I just think they're really intriguing and very cool to watch. So you can check that out. So here are our data tables. So what do the rye seeds look like? What do the alfalfa seeds look like? And then what do the wheatgrass seeds look like? We want students to start using words to describe what they're thinking. And then illustration also can be helpful at this age for them to get used to maybe drawing details on things, looking closely at things, and using words when appropriate to describe their ideas. So we're kind of trying to ease them into the process of taking observational notes. And then we're looking at session 3, what's the same and different about babies and grown-ups? Sorry, that's session 2. How are seedlings and adults different and the same? So there's just a discussion about that. And there is a worksheet also, which is baby plants different from parents worksheet. And in this, students are simply making an argument or constructing an explanation. How are baby plants different than adult plants? So size, shape of leaves, those are some things that students might mention there. So now we're looking at, this is where things start getting exciting. Session 4 and 5, page 36 of our storyline, differences between babies and parents. So we are talking about how we look similar to our parents, but how we look different as well. And I would probably bring a picture of myself and my children, since I have kiddos, and have students look at the differences between me and my kids, or bring a picture of my parents and have them look at the differences between how I look and how my parents look. And I would just caution you to be careful if there are students that live with families or have guardians that are not their biological parents, then this might be something that you skip or talk differently about because we are talking about inheritance here. And so when we talk about the animals, we're going to be looking at pictures of baby and adult animals. And students will be looking at matching the adult animal with the baby and discussing their ideas. So again, really cool to bring in pictures or even ask students to bring in pictures, but just to be careful not to create a tough experience for students that might not live with their biological families. So we have some more pictures that I won't talk about, but we're looking at puppies and how they're different from each other. And we're going to continue to talk about parents and babies and how they're similar to each other and different. So here's some more examples of babies, baby birds, more babies. And so in the actual slideshows, there's notes on which animals these are in case your students are curious and asking like, what's that weird looking thing, yellow thing there? What type of tree is that? Or what kind of a seal is that? So there's notes in the actual slideshow that you can check out. And now we're looking at big cats, and there's similarities between the structures that they have, but there's also differences based on um, what kind of a cat they are. So these are really important discussions where students will be able to start articulating things that they're noticing. So in STEM and science, being able to communicate your ideas is a very important skill, and also being able to look at details and describe what you're seeing is also very important. So we're trying to build the process of that positive STEM identity and positive sense of self in students, because these are things that are really accessible. They can definitely think about these ideas and talk about them. So again, opening doors for students that might not um, have, according to the systems in place, been on the trajectory of going towards STEM. We're trying to open doors of opportunity. Oh, okay, and this is myself and my son. So we are similar, but we're also different. And then we move on to session 6, which is includes some really cool books. Meet My Family by Laura Purdy Salas, and I've gotten a lot of positive feedback about this book being in the kit, and it's a fun one to read. It's about different types of families and animal babies and different families that they live in. And there's also a simple reader called Follow Me that's included in the kit as well. And we're simply talking about some of the ideas in there. And then talking about protection, there's this theme of families protecting babies. Some animal families protect their babies, and some babies are kind of on their own. And talking about how they protect each other, how do animals communicate with each other, how do babies communicate with their parents, and that's, human babies also communicate with their parents. And then reconnecting with the anchor chart, because there are um, some structures or behaviors that animals use to protect each other and communicate with their babies. And is there any way that humans protect our babies in similar ways? I always think of this kangaroos holding the mama baby holding the baby in its, the mama kangaroo holding the baby in its pouch. And we also have these like really cute parent baby carriers, right, that we're using to protect our babies and keep them close to us. So how can we think about that and add to our anchor chart? So here is a direct standard for life science for first grade that I just wanted to call attention to, because we're asked to, with our students, read texts and use media to determine patterns in behavior of parents and offspring. So enjoy those two books. And if there are more articles that you're able to find to help students kind of think about this idea, then you're so welcome to bring those in and add them to the flow of the storyline. So we are currently at lesson 4, drinking, eating, and protection. And in this lesson, students will study how babies and parents work together to survive. The lesson will start out with a discussion about what living things need and what survival means. Then students will study different plants and animals and the different traits and behaviors they have that aid in their survival. So we're on page 39 right now. We're starting lesson number 4. And this is where we're really digging even more deeply into this idea of survival and what is survival. So let's go ahead and dig in. So we start this unit with a field STEM outdoor walk. So field STEM pretty much is outdoor STEM. And there are some templates provided on page 41 where we're pretty much just looking at patterns and shapes. So what are interesting shapes and patterns that you see in nature? And it's just, for me, whenever I go for a walk outside and I just pick up a leaf, there's just so many beautiful patterns and shapes all around that are just fascinating. So we're helping kids to slow down and looking at different patterns and shapes, and maybe there's a specific shape that they find interesting or fascinating, and we're having students focus on this process of making observations, right? So structures, patterns, behaviors. What did students witness when they went on their field STEM walk? So here on this slide, it says sessions 3 and 4, it's suggested to skip. So sessions 3 and 4 were FOSS investigation for bulbs and roots, and FOSS investigation for bulbs and roots part 2. And in that, kids are growing bulbs, and pretty much it's a little time consuming. So we suggested if you're short on time, you can skip that. And then before that, session 2 was a quick session about survival. And what does it mean for a plant or animal to survive? So what does this idea of survival means? Because that's really important. We're going to be jumping into that and digging more deeply into that idea of survival. So that's on page 42. So now we're moving on. We're on page 45, and we're talking about water. So water is pretty critical to life, right? And there are a series of pictures where we will be looking at different plants and animals and the ways that they obtain or collect water. So these are going to be really interesting if we want to revisit the anchor chart after, because a lot of what they see in the ways that plants and animals are collecting or storing water is going to be similar to the ways that humans try to conserve or collect or store or carry water. So something interesting to think about and see if your students are able to make some of those connections. And then there's also a water brainstorming sheet on page 46, which is simply a space where students can share what are some ways that people collect, drink, or use water. So we're constantly connecting with this idea in the driving question of how do we use nature as inspiration to solve some of our problems? We have this cactus. This is a cool video with an elephant drinking water. There's some biomimicry, inspirational connections between the trunk of an elephant and ways that we drink water too. So see if students can make that connection. This is pretty funny to watch. The lion drinking. Here's a bug drinking water. So this is just a reminder to connect with the anchor chart and see if there's any plant and animal structures or behaviors that humans can learn from or get inspiration from. So next we are on to session 6, which is page 47. How do animals eat food? So how do animals eat? And there's some pictures and videos that you can look through that will get students thinking about how animals catch and eat food and how are they similar to ways that we eat or gather food or ways that we solve problems at home. And there's a lot of connections between that. And there's also a handout on page 48, drawing of an animal, and then my animal eats by. And then students can think about an animal that's their favorite and how does that animal eat food? Are there any similarities between how this animal catches and consumes food or collects and consumes food and ways that we collect food and eat food to survive? So again, this is a reminder to look back at that anchor chart and see if there were any cool connections that students made between animals and how they gather and eat food and how we gather and eat food. So the final session in lesson 1 is about protection and sheltering. So we have this book that we've included in the kit called We Build Our Homes, which is a pretty cool book that has different structures that birds create in order to shelter. And they're just some really fascinating behaviors, really fascinating structures and processes that these animals are going through to create shelter. So an interesting thing to talk about and think about. And then just a reminder to connect with that anchor chart, which at this point might be getting a little bit big, which is kind of cool because you're documenting all the things that students have learned and all the ways that they've grown and learned about animal, plants, and the structures that help them survive and how it connects to us as humans and how interconnected we are. So we're done with session 7. And session 8 is just going to be a reminder to connect to the storyline and wrap up the anchor chart because now we're entering our last lesson, which is simply going to be an engineering design project where we're going to be applying a lot of what we've learned about structures, function, and biomimicry. We're going to apply that to solve a real problem in our environment. So I'm super excited. We're at lesson 5, which is engineering a nature-inspired device to solve a problem. And in this culminating lesson, students will actually pick a problem in their home or in the classroom that is something they'd like to solve. And they're going to use inspiration from nature, either an animal or a plant, or animals and plants, to create and design a device that will help solve this problem. So this lesson is essentially connecting our science and engineering practices of constructing explanations and designing solutions and asking questions and defining problems to our disciplinary core idea of structure, function, growth, and development. And we're connecting these ideas and actually engineering a device that's going to be helpful to somebody. So I'm excited about this unit. Oh, sorry, this lesson. So this is, if you look on page 53, there's an overview of the engineering design process, and we have provided one version of this process for you to consider using in your classroom. But honestly, there's so many different ways that engineering and design thinking can happen. And if you have a better way that you'd like to engage your students in this process, please, please, please feel free to use that method that you, based on your expertise, find more useful. So this is just essentially a suggestion. And so we're starting by thinking about what engineers do and what does the process of engineering look like. So we're introducing this idea, or reintroducing this idea of engineering, an engineer as someone who helps others by solving problems. And an engineer is really interested in how and why things. So there are steps in the engineering process, and those steps can actually be pretty fluid. So they're not as rigid as we often say they are or think they are. So here's a version where we're going to wonder what the problem is. So pick a problem. Think about why is that a problem? And then we're going to imagine a solution using what we've learned about from animals and plants about survival. Then we're going to plan a device. What materials are we going to use? How's it going to look? How's it going to work? We're going to actually build that device, create it, test it, and optimize it. So optimize means we're going to test to see if it works. How can we make it better? And then we're going to share our ideas with an audience. So in this lesson, we bring back this example of the Shinkansen train in Tokyo, Japan, and how this biomimicry, or this inspiration from the kingfisher's beak, was used to design this super effective train. So this is the old bullet train that was very loud, sonic booming as it left the tunnels in the neighborhoods, causing a lot of problems for people, and also not going as fast. So here's a video of a sonic boom and how annoying that would have been if that was booming in your neighborhood all day long. And how this beautiful animal inspired a change in design. So this is another video of the kingfisher. And then now the train looks like this, and it's way more efficient and way more peaceful. It's not sonic booming anymore. So now we're reintroducing this idea of biomimicry, or when we copy the structures and or processes in nature to help solve a human problem. So we're not using an animal to solve a problem. We're using inspiration from the way that the animal or the plant does something in nature to help solve a problem. Sometimes folks confuse biomimicry with actually like using plants or animals to solve a problem. That's a little bit different. In this, we're mimicking or copying what happens in nature to help us solve a human problem. So here again is our driving question, which we would reintroduce back. And then here's our engineering design process that we have selected for this unit, but feel free to change that up based on what you find is working better for you and your students. And so in the next few stages, we're going to kind of walk through this engineering design process. So what is the problem? And there's a whole engineering design project packet on pages 55 through page 61, where there are spaces where students can write down their responses to all these prompts. So I encourage you to print that out for them so they have space to really think through their ideas and write down what they're thinking. We've imagined, so what are some solutions or ideas? And based on how well your students work together in teams, I would suggest that they don't do this project alone, and maybe work with a partner or small team. But if you find that students are better off working alone, or if there's some students that work better or prefer to work alone, then I would encourage you to do what is best for their needs. Planning a prototype. And this is where you want them to really know what materials are going to be available. And speaking of that, you might want to start collecting some recyclables, because it's really helpful to have things like toilet paper rolls, paper towel rolls, empty cartons, milk cartons, empty yogurt boxes, empty berry containers, things like that for students to be able to use for building. And students actually build their prototype. And then they test their prototype and optimize their designs. How can they make it better? What's working, what's not working well? And then sharing and celebrating their product that they design. And so in the last session, which is session 11, based on the resources available to you and based on time and other details, you can put on a STEM fair where students will share their design, and we'll also talk about which organisms inspired their design. So which animals or plants were they mimicking, and how did those animals and plants help them to solve that problem? So that's an opportunity for them to share their design with an outside audience, and that's always helpful. It always kind of increases the stakes a little bit and encourages students to work a little bit harder. There's a little bit more motivation when you know that somebody besides your teacher is going to see your product. So celebrate and share is an important phase of that engineering design process. So that was our unit. We pretty much walked through our unit, and I'm really excited to have shared this with you. And I wanted to just give you time to think and reflect about how you might implement this, what you might change. I really would encourage you to take from this what you would like to take, to not take things that you don't find helpful, and then to change things to best meet the needs of your students, because we do write this curriculum based on feedback from a small group of teachers, but your students are different, and their needs are different, and their interests are different. So please feel free to expand or change this in any ways you find helpful. This is a resource for you, but you are ultimately the professional with the expertise to really craft that awesome STEM learning experience for your students and to open those doors of opportunity. So again, thank you so much for joining me, and please do be in touch, and please do let me know if I could be of any help. And yes, thank you so much for joining me. So again, thank you for joining. Here's my email address in case I could be of any help, in case you have feedback you'd like to share, or in case you want to work on something together, or if you're doing something cool in your classroom with a storyline and you'd like to share, please reach out. I would love to be in touch with you. And in the meantime, please take care, and good luck. And thank you for all you do for your students and for your community.